Sharon McMahon, in some ways, America's government teacher, right? Welcome to the Preamble. It's an honor to have you here. We were even just talking before about that number of the ways in which you have engaged in teaching and expanding America's knowledge of what's happened in history and in government. I want to personally just thank you for what you did around the pandemic and misinformation. So welcome and thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me.
What I'd like to jump into is first and foremost is you're coming out with a book, and that book is called The Small and the Mighty. Can you tell me a little bit? You've had 17 series of podcasts, you're doing all of these things everywhere else. Why a book and why not?
Thank you. Yes, The Small and the Mighty is coming out at the end of September. And, I've been working on this book for 3 years. So this is not a one Saturday afternoon. I was like, I should write a book. This has been a long time in the process. Anybody who's written a book knows how absolutely glacial the process can be. And also specifically writing a history book is very slow because it's not just typing up your ideas. It's conducting copious amounts of research that then has to be fact-checked, and writing history in a compelling and fascinating way is a very specific genre and a very specific skill, like narrative nonfiction. So anyway, all that to say, it's been a long time coming. But these are the stories of unsung Americans who changed the course of history and people who did something remarkable, where they were with the resources available to them. And I think those are stories that people are really hungry to hear right now. We are George Washington out, right? George Washington's great. That's he's good to learn about. We need to know who he is. But that story has also been done to death. We've heard about crossing the Delaware. Okay. We heard that part a few times. We did that in elementary school, middle school, high school 2 times. So I find the people of history who are not on the monuments, who do not have the bronze statues and the oil paintings, to me, they do some of the most interesting things that no one is even aware of. So that's the focus of The Small and the Mighty.
Can you just give us a bit of a teaser? Tell us maybe just one kind of story that you're highlighting.
Yeah. Well, one of the people in the book came from absolutely nothing. His parents were immigrants. His parents were peddlers. Okay. Actual peddlers, went door to door selling items. We have, fabric. I have eyeglasses, all of the things that a peddler going door to door might have. And he came into large sums of money by chance and what he referred to as by virtue of proximity, by luck. And what he chose to do with the money, it just I love it so much. Instead of building monuments to himself, instead of naming museums after himself, instead of putting his name on the side of everything, what he decides is that he is going to help build schools with it. And ultimately, in the United States, this man built more than 5,000 schools in the United States. 5,000 schools. I can almost guarantee you don't know who he is. But if you were like, Sharon, I built 5 schools, I would be like, dang, that's incredible. 5 schools. 1 school is incredible, right? 1 school is a cool achievement. Look at over the lifetime of that school, that's thousands of children you've impacted. 5 schools is cool. 50 schools is cool. 5,000 schools, and the amount of impact that has on American history that we are not even aware of. The potentially tens of millions of families who, over the course of centuries, their great-great-grandparents had a chance to become educated, and that has a ripple effect across their entire community and their entire bloodline. Those are the kinds of stories that I just think are so fascinating, so worth telling, and the book is full of stories like that.
So Sharon, full disclosure, I've started 3 schools. I started 3 boarding schools for inner city kids in Washington, D.C.
Amazing.
Baltimore, and Miami.
Amazing.
So
Good
this
for you.
person
That's
started
incredible.
2,000 more schools than I did.
Yeah. 5,000 schools. Is that
That's
not
amazing.
unbelievable?
Yeah.
3 schools is incredible. A pat on the back to you.
No, thank you. But I mean, you're right. It's these kinds of stories that we need to know. It actually harkens back. If I remember correctly, your first season of your podcast, you did a whole series on resilience, right? On the resilience of it. Does that in any way relate to these kinds of stories as well, or are they different?
Yeah. So one of my first podcast series was about Japanese American incarceration during World War II in the United States. And there actually, in the book, are some stories related to that topic. And that are just, I love them so much. But yes, this idea that people have been dealt a variety of hands in their lives, right? Some people are born in the right place at the right time with incredible wealth, rich parents, all the connections, and they go on to do something cool too. Like Teddy Roosevelt is a great example of that. Teddy Roosevelt dealt the card he was handed, a very interesting,
Boy, did he use it well.
Yeah, dealt the cards he was handed in a very interesting way, right? But he was dealt pretty good cards. Teddy Roosevelt was.
That's right.
But other people are dealt nothing. They don't even get a card, right? Like they're like, I would love any card whatsoever. I would take a 7 if that's what you have, right? And yet they still do something really impactful. But yet here's the thing. They don't always set out on this journey thinking someday there's going to be a book about me. They just continue to put one foot in front of the other with the hope that what they do will matter. And that hope that they experience, that what they do will matter, is not a feeling that they're waiting to descend from the heavens, where they just wake up in the morning, they're like, I just am encompassed with an incredible sense of hope. No, hope is a choice that they are making. They're orienting themselves towards choosing to have hope each day that what they do will make a difference. And I think that's a message that all of us really can use right now, like that we can choose to have hope about the future, because to many people, the future seems, fraught with peril. Whatever that future might look like, whatever your politics are, you might be looking to the future and being like, I do not know. I don't know if I like what I see. It looks real scary. I'm not interested in repeating anything that's happened in the past. A sense of hopelessness is something that I think is very pervasive in the United States right now. Like there's just no hope that it will get better. But listen, we can't make change unless we choose to have hope.
That's right. It's really, this is a great overlap with the work at CNS, because you're talking about people who changed the course of history, but they did it because they had a commitment of sorts to doing that, right? It comes from hope. But there's other aspects of being a committed citizen that must also apply. When you think about all the people that you've interviewed, when you think about these people that you've written about, what to you stands out or seems to be required to be the kind of engaged and committed citizen that we need in this country right now?
Mm-hmm. There's one woman in the book that I profiled that says something that I think is so profound that I would like to see like on billboards on the Beltway, like I'd like to see a stadium renamed this. And she experiences tremendous hardship in her life. She's almost killed a number of times. People try to firebomb her house. She's falsely accused of crimes and is arrested. Her husband is a philanderer with a secret second family, and then he dies and leaves her penniless, and she has to raise her child alone. Like she has been dealt a terrible hand, right?
Okay.
And yet she continues her important work, even not knowing where it might lead. And one of the things that someone asked her as she got towards the end of her life, she's, like, what have you learned from all of the work that you've done? What have you learned? And she said, I have learned that I can work with my enemies because you never know when they might have a change of heart at any moment.
Wow.
And that statement to me, man, do we need some people to adopt that today? I can work with my enemies because we never know when they might have a change of heart. And if I'm not working with them, who is? Who is? Right? Like if my enemies are opposed to some really great initiative that I have, my enemies are opposed to building the school or, whatever it is, my enemies are opposed to this. Who's working with them instead? How can we ever hope to make change for the good if we don't ever influence the people who you might regard as an enemy? Where would the positive influence be coming from if not from you? So I love this idea that like, you never know when that person might change their mind, and they're never going to change it if they do not have the opportunity to be influenced for good by somebody like you.
So this notion comes up often for us because we talk about it within the concept of civil discourse, of actually engaging thoughtfully across difference. It's something that we do, the work that we do is largely, face-to-face. You engage in civil discourse virtual and online where it's, 1,000 times more complicated. How do you think about how to do that from your experience, certainly when you started this with the pandemic to now?
It is more tricky online. I will say that because it's so easy to say things anonymously, like that's a very challenging, a challenging aspect of this. It is hard to hate people up close. And this is something that I'm sure you've experienced in your work, that looking in somebody's eyeballs, sharing a meal with them, even if you ultimately don't agree on all of the same things, you can still walk away from that interaction feeling like, we may not agree on blah, blah, blah item, but I really like that guy. You know what I mean? Like that's an experience you can walk away with when you share a meal with somebody. I really like her. She seems really nice, even though we don't agree about X, Y, and Z. And that's much harder to foster on the internet, where you don't get to look in somebody's eyes, where you don't get to have a meal together or whatever it is, a face-to-face conversation even. Everybody's anonymous. Some of the people are bots, like some people are there because they enjoy the verbal equivalent of drive-by shootings, where they just are really interested in coming in, sowing discord and zooming out. That's fun for them. They do it as a hobby. So one of the things that I try to think about is that I focus on people who want to engage in good faith. And that's a surprisingly large number of people. It's a surprisingly large number of people. But what ends up happening too often online is all of the drive-by shooters, metaphorical drive-by shooters, get all of the attention because they are zooming in being like, you're fat and ugly and your mom is a terrible person. And now you're like, excuse me, we do not speak to women that way. You don't even know my mother. Do you know what I mean? Like you get very sidetracked by these people, when in reality, there's hundreds or thousands of people sitting right there who actually would enjoy engaging in a thoughtful discourse about an important topic that affects their lives. But the loud and sort of, the person who's trying to stir the pot, so to speak, gets all the attention. So one of the things I keep
that Amanda Ripley calls the conflict entrepreneurs, right? That they're sowing conflict for their own ends.
Yes. And there's a variety of reasons, but a variety of ends. There are a variety of ends. But the idea that I am not, my highest calling in life is not to argue with people about whether or not I'm ugly on the internet. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not going on my headstone someday. That's probably not going to be in my obituary. I hope my kids don't remember me for that. I hope my kids are not like, Mom always had some real sick burns in the comments. I hope that's not the legacy that I'm leaving. So one of the things I think about is engaging with people in good faith who want to engage in good faith. You can't force people to do that, right? And secondly, I always think about my own digital legacy. What do I hope that someday my loved ones, when I'm long gone, and maybe one of my grandkids someday is going to be like, well, Grandma Sharon, that's weird. She had a whole bunch of followers on the internet. That's so interesting. I hope that someday when my descendants or a historian of the future or whatever does a deep dive excavation into what I said and did on the internet, my hope is that I have left a legacy to be proud of, right? That we in fact right now are all building our digital legacies. And what we think we delete it's not really deleted, right? The DMs that we send, those are going to be made public someday, whether you think they are or not. You think that like, oh, that, and then I blocked that person. They'll never see them again. That's not how that actually works. So I am always thinking about, am I the kind of person in private that I would be proud of in the future, that future me would be proud of? So those are, I mean, I could keep talking about this, but those are just two things I think about: engaging in good faith and building my own digital legacy.
So you also, I mean, you have 1.1 plus growing followers. So you also had to start from a basis not only in good faith, but building trust. I don't know if you did it proactively or it just happened, but how do you think you started to build that trust from the beginning of your work?
Transparency is one part of it. Being transparent about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, what my goals are. And being fair is another part of it. I now have a long history of fairness, to a commitment to not engaging in bad faith argumentation on the internet, to actually caring about what people on both sides of the aisle might think about something, to giving voice to people who might feel like they are their position is drowned out by these conflict entrepreneurs, so to speak. You don't really understand somebody until you can articulate their position back to them in a way that they would agree with and say, that's correct. That is what I feel. And I think that is modeling how to do that, I think, is an important skill today, because what we're learning are a lot of how to create conflict skills. We're learning a lot of like how to cut people out of your life when they disagree with you skills. But we're not actually engaging actively in skill building around the ideas of like building a community or acting in a way that is in accordance with your values. These are skills that people can practice, but they need to be given modeling on how to practice them, and they need to be given the opportunity to practice those things. So those are spaces that are kind of lacking on the internet. That's why work like the kind of work that you do is so important. But it can be difficult to access those spaces in a digital format. So when people feel truly heard is when, or understood, that's when somebody is willing to hear you out. And when they can see, she actually did take the time to understand where I'm coming from. And then she was able to articulate, here is what people who think this truly believe. And here's what people who think that truly, deeply believe. And to be able to fairly give, sort of assess those things so that people would be like, that's accurate. I do think that. That sense of fairness is something that I have also worked for a long time to cultivate.
So at CNS, a lot of the work that we do is to cultivate Gen Z's civic potential. So you've been talking about all of this already, the skills piece. I really appreciate what you just outlined. I have a question around civic knowledge. What are common misconceptions about American governments, civics, and history that you see, especially that people have, that we should be actively seeking to change?
This is a big issue. This is one of the ways that I actually started this account was with really basic government knowledge you can easily verify. This is not based on my opinion. These are just like things that are real or not real. And the internet is full of people who are really confidently wrong. And that overconfidence, it creates believability in some cases. If I'm like, listen to me, this is the best food you are ever going to eat. It is so good. I have never had food that is better than this food. Like the way that I'm presenting it is very compelling, right? Like you're like, dang, okay, this is the best food. Wow. So that's what's happening online, except people are telling you the wrong information. Listen to me. When the people graduate from the electoral college, okay, when they graduate and they get their degrees, they are going to walk out onto Pennsylvania Avenue because the Electoral College is like down the street from the White House. Okay. They're going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue, and then they have like a ceremony outside of the White House. You can watch it on CNN every year. It's on C-SPAN. And then they become official electors. It's the graduates of the Electoral College. Well, listen, I just said that really compellingly, right? I just said it really confidently. And 100% of it is wrong. And so it's very easy to believe and to be manipulated by people who are saying things that are incorrect if you don't actually know what the correct information is. The best inoculation against misinformation is our facts.
Yes.
That's the best inoculation. There is no such building as the Electoral College. There is no such university as the Electoral College. It is not located in Washington, D.C. because it's not a place. You don't graduate from it and become an elector. That's not how any of that works, right? And so if you knew how the Electoral College works, you would look at me and be like, excuse me? That is bananas. What you're saying is bananas. That's not true at all. So that's part of my mission as an educator. That's how I view my sort of role on the internet, is to help people understand the basics and also some of the idiosyncrasies and nuance of how government works, so that they are inoculated against misinformation. And then it also has an additional goal of, you can't change what you don't understand. If you're out here thinking that people are graduating from the Electoral College, listen, it's real hard to change government if that's your understanding of how it works, because that's not real at all. So if you
right starting point,
right, it's not. Fundamental misunderstandings are not a good place to start from. If you're a heart surgeon, your fundamental understanding of how the heart works and how the circulatory system in the human body, how that works, has to be so good before you can hope to fix it with surgery.
Yep.
Right? You can't just slice in there and be like, well, we're going to find something to do in here. That seems absurd. You only want people who really understand what they're talking about to go in and make structural changes to things. So these ideas of, you have to understand how it works in order to change it in a meaningful way that doesn't kill the patient, those are important, fundamental pieces of knowledge. And that's part of what I do.
So time flies. We have just enough time left for what we call the rapid fire round of questions. I've got some quick questions for you. And just to kind of set the stage, these questions are all around what we call at CNS the big three pieces that we want every engaged and educated citizen to have: to be civically well-informed, to be productively engaged for the common good, and to be committed to democracy in America. So I'm going to ask you, Sharon, 3 quick questions. Just tell me, firstly, what comes to mind first? So question 1 is, are you optimistic about our democracy? Why or why not?
I am. And do you know, one of the biggest reasons I'm optimistic about our democracy is Gen Z. I am very bullish on Gen Z. I think Gen Z is poised to become the most civically engaged generation in American history. And I say that without hyperbole. Going back in the past, yeah, there were some guys that were involved for sure. Women were excluded. Members of minority groups were excluded. Immigrants were excluded. Native Americans were excluded. We have now engaged in a multi-hundred-year experiment that has resulted, by and large, in the advancement of people's rights. And we have built something to be proud of. And I think Gen Z is going to do us proud someday.
Can you share a story about a time that you actively engaged in your local community, and how was that experience?
When I was in college, I worked for an organization, or I volunteered for an organization that specifically was aimed at exposing kids to the election process. And there's an actual fair amount of research that demonstrates that if children grow up seeing their parents vote, that if they go to the polls with their parents who are voting, and that if they participate in elections in adolescence and in young adulthood, that they are highly likely to be voters for the rest of their lives. It's a little bit like if you don't become an alcoholic by the time you're 25, your chances of becoming an alcoholic go way down, right? Like these foundational pieces are very important to future development. So I volunteered for this organization that on election day, we would put volunteers in all of the different polling places, and we had activities for the kids to do in the different polling places. They got their own little kids ballot that they could fill out while their parents were voting. They could, fill them out with crayons. And we had like a little, machine that they would put them in. Like the kids love to put the papers in the machine. That's the best part. And the stickers and these sorts of things. And part of it is just demystifying the election process. This is something that we do that's important. It's something fun to do. It's not a scary thing to do. When my daughter was about 8 years old, I brought her with me to vote and I let her help me fill in some of the bubbles. And I asked her, was that easier than you thought or harder than you thought? She was like, it was much easier than I thought. And she had been under the impression that voting was like what it was in elementary school, where you write somebody's name down on a slip of paper and put it in a shoebox. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want to vote for McKinsey. She was thinking in her mind, I'm going to have to remember how to spell everybody's name. And that idea of like, I got to spell their name and write it down correctly and remember who I want to vote for. That seemed very daunting to her. But like filling in a circle next to a printed choice list, that seems really easy. So now when she turns 18, she's going to know that that's not a scary process. You don't have to memorize the spellings. Anyway, so one of the ways that I have engaged in my community is by I hope, to engage kids in the election process so they'll grow up to be voters.
And then finally, how do you grow your own civic knowledge?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think one of the best ways is talking to people. Yeah. Talking to people from different backgrounds. Yes, a lot of stuff you can learn from people like me, or listen to podcasts, or read a textbook, or take a class. There's a lot of fundamental knowledge that you can acquire that way, of like 3 branches of government. Like these are pieces of knowledge that you can acquire in a variety of ways. But understanding, for example, directly from somebody, why did you come to this country as an immigrant? What has it been like to be an undocumented person living in the United States? What has it been like for you to grow up in a place that I did not grow up? If I grew up in, a cornfield in Illinois, asking somebody, how was it different growing up in Los Angeles? These are the kinds of things that you just can't learn from a textbook, and that greatly enhance my own civic knowledge about how things like different public policies impact various groups and what those groups actually value and care about. Those things are also just, I think, really important to keep in mind when we are making public policies that impact our neighbors.
Well, Sharon McMahon, podcaster, educator, teacher, now author, and it's such an honor to have you. Thank you for joining us here on Preamble.
Thank you.